Hi everybody, my name is Jack Shaw. I'm the District Manager for the UK and Scandinavia here in Regenesis. And thank you for joining us on our webinar today. Ahead of giving the talk, which will be done in, well, English and Swedish, mostly Swedish, I'll just go through a couple of admin details first. So should anybody experience any sound or connectivity issues during the webinar, the best thing would be for you to end your session, close your browser and then log back in again. This usually solves the majority of problems. However, if this problem persists, you can then dial in from a separate screen via a low-cost telephone line. Instructions for this can be found inside the welcome message on the chat panel. But if there are any, it may be useful for you to know that we are also recording this webinar, and a link to the recording will be emailed out to everybody who is registered within the next few days. We're also hoping to do an extended Q&A session. So the bulk of this presentation will be in Swedish, but it will the Q&A, the questions and answers, will be in English. So if you would be so kind to me and submit your questions in English, we'll be able to answer them. So we're hoping that will last for about 20 to 30 minutes. We'll collect all the questions and we'll do our best to address all of them at the end of the webinar. We try and keep this webinar within an hour, but if we do run out of time and we don't get to answer your questions, don't worry, we will follow up with you via an email in the next couple of days. Today's presenter then, who I'll be handing over to, is Helena Nord. Helena has over 11 years experience within the remediation industry, and she is a project manager and in situ technical lead within RGS Nordic. Helena and I have worked on probably hundreds of sites together across Sweden and Finland, and the case study that Helena will be presenting today is a site where we address chlorinated solvent contamination in situ. So over to you, Helena, and yeah, speak towards the end of the presentation.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm going to switch over to Swedish now. Den här presentationen kommer alltså vara på svenska, precis som Jack berättade. Och den kommer då att handla om ett projekt som vi har gjort i Svenljunga på den före detta industrin skandinaviska päls. Upplägget för dagen kommer vara att vi först tittar lite på introduktion och bakgrund. Vad har man valt för saneringsstrategi och metod? Hur utförandet gick till och vad vi använder för produkt. Där kommer Jack att komma in med ett inspel på engelska. Och sen så blir det då lite om kontrollprogrammet vi hade efteråt, vad resultaten blev. Och lite siffror i slutet om kostnader och klimatpåverkan. Efter detta så kommer vi då att ta upp de frågor som kommer in. Kort bara en sida om RGS Nordic. Vi jobbar ju över de nordiska länderna och gör då dels saneringar ute på plats. Det kan vara schaktsaneringar, det kan vara in situ och det kan vara mobil vattenrening. Det här gör vi ett 100-tal projekt per år och vi gör även ett antal projekt med lite andra inriktningar. Vi har i Danmark Nordens största industrispillvattenanläggning som renar detta biologiskt. Och de tar hand om ungefär 500 000 ton vatten per år. Våra fasta anläggningar i Sverige och Danmark återanvänder och behandlar flera miljoner ton jord- och byggarivavfall årligen. Och våra största anläggningar ligger i Göteborg och Köpenhamn. Det här projektet Skandinaviska päls är ett projekt som vi har gjort på offentlig upphandling. I Svenljunga, som ni ser på bilden, det stora röda området, hade Skandinaviska päls sin verksamhet under några tiotal år i mitten på 1900-talet. Verksamheten var baserad på beredning av pälsar och detta gav då upphov till föroreningar i mark och vatten. En del av föroreningen bestod då i att de hade använt trikloreten i beredningsprocessen som då hade förorenat ett område som ni ser i den nedre bilden, en liten röd, ett litet rött område, saneringsområdet, in i den gula rutan. Men hela det här det största röda området på den övre bilden var då schaktsanerat ner till 3 meter och sedan återfyllt in tidigare entreprenad. Själva föroreningen fanns över ett område om drygt 300 kvadratmeter och bestod då av klorerade lösningsmedel. Det var ju inte bara TCE eftersom det fanns en pågående nedbrytning. Behandlingsdjupet var satt från 2,5 till 8 meter, vilket gjorde att vi hade drygt 1800 kubikmeter att behandla. Och jordarterna var silt och finsand främst, med vissa inslag av organiskt material. Och grundvattennivån låg då strax över 2 meter. När man då valde metod för denna saneringen så tittade man då på olika alternativ. Man tyckte värderingen var då att det var relativt kostsamt att göra en schaktsanering för den här föroreningen, och det var också kostsamt att göra en termisk sanering i förhållande till den riskreduktion som man uppnår när man tar bort föroreningen. Detta då i kombination med att tillsynsmyndigheten kunde acceptera måttliga krav på resthalter och tider för saneringen gjorde då att vi i entreprenaden fick 4 år på oss att utföra saneringen, och därför då så valdes reduktiv deklorering som metod. De förundersökningar som hade gjorts innan vi började projektet visade att man hade i medelhalt ungefär 7 milligram per kilo TC och DC i jorden och ungefär 0,5 milligram per kilo av vinylklorid. Halterna varierade ganska mycket och maxhalten låg på ungefär 80 för TC och 90 för DC. Så det var ganska ställvis höga halter ändå. Föroreningshalterna i grundvatten varierade till viss del, kanske inte riktigt lika mycket. TC och DC runt 100 till 500. Och vinylklorid fanns då i vissa punkter. Man hade provtagit inte alla, men upp till ungefär 3000 mikrogram per liter. Och vinylklorid är ju då en nedbrytningsprodukt från TC och DC. På det här projektet hade man satt åtgärdsmål i jord. Och det var då formulerat som så att medelvärdet av de klorerade föroreningarna då fick inte överstiga 3 milligram per kilo i de prover som man tog efter saneringen, och maxvärdet i ett enskilt prov fick inte överstiga 20 milligram per kilo, och man skulle ta ett antal 10-tal prover. När vi kom dit så började vi med att göra en förutsättningskontroll, och den gick till så att vi installerade 5 stycken grundvattenrör med rotosonic för att då kunna få en fin installation och en bra bild över jordlagerföljderna. Vi tog då ut jordprover från ett par punkter och såg att vi hade lägre halter i jord än vad som man hade hittat tidigare. Men vi hade ett större spann föroreningshalter i grundvatten, och framförallt så hade vi ganska mycket högre maxhalter. Som mest ungefär 14 gånger de halter som var uppmätta sedan innan. Och det här var ju framförallt då i den brunn som hette GV4, hade betydligt mer föroreningshalter än de övriga brunnarna. Vi provtog även på eten och etan och fann detta på, inte riktigt alla, men i flera punkter. Och det visar då att det redan fanns en pågående fullständig deklorering. Och av den anledningen så var det ju ett väldigt bra val att fortsätta då med reduktiv deklorering och så att säga snabba på den naturliga nedbrytningen som redan fanns. Jordarterna bedömde vi som lite finare än i förfrågningsunderlaget, ungefär lerig silt. Med dessa data så verifierade vi då den designen vi hade gjort i anbudsskedet och gjorde då bedömningen att trots att halterna var så pass mycket högre så kunde vi ändå använda samma tillvägagångssätt och samma dos. Och varför det var så kommer Jack att prata lite om en liten stund. Injekteringen utfördes med vår borrbandvagn som ni ser i bakgrunden på bilden här. Kryssen är injekteringspunkter och det här var då i början av arbetet. Vi kom dit med den, vi hade 2 kollegor med oss och lite blandningsutrustning. Och injekterade då ungefär 1200 liter per punkt i 21 stycken injekteringspunkter. Och det här gjordes då sommaren 2018. Tog ungefär 2 veckor. Och den produkten vi använde var ju då 3DME som Regenesis tillhandahöll. And now Jack is going to talk about 3DME and also about how we could use the same design despite the fact that the contaminant levels were much higher than what we knew before the project started.
No problem. Can you hear me, Helena?
Yes.
Great. So so initially when we reviewed the data, concentration levels were quite low, and when we produced a dosage design for 3DME, it was largely based on the distribution between each of the injection points. So there is a minimum dose that you need to put into the ground to create adequate distribution and to hold the conditions at the correct redox for reductive dechlorination to take place. Concentration levels then increased significantly compared to baseline, but these were still within the safety tolerance limit based on the distribution dose. So stoichiometrically, we had more than enough hydrogen to continue to maintain the reductive dechlorination process for the volume of contaminant mass recorded by the subsequent site investigations. In terms of reductive dechlorination, I'm just going to take a minute and talk about what this is. Just as an illustration, so reductive dechlorination is the natural attenuation process by which microbes that are already in the subsurface, indeed were already in the subsurface here at Svengula, utilize hydrogen as an electron donor. They exchange that hydrogen atom for a chlorine atom, degrading PCE to TCE to DCE, and eventually all the way down to vinyl chloride and then eventually ethene, this harmless byproduct. And what we're looking to do with 3DME is to stimulate and maintain this process. In terms of using enhanced reductive dechlorination as a remediation technique, this isn't something that's new. It's been done for over 20 years, so it's a well trodden path. It's a well-used remediation technique. But 20 years ago, people were using substrates that they were injecting into the ground that were not appropriately soluble. So what do I mean by that? They were using things like molasses that isn't particularly soluble. So you inject it into the ground, it will stick to the aquifer, but it's not going to release much hydrogen over a long period of time. The opposite of this would be true of lactate. So injecting something like lactate into the ground, you get a real quick release of hydrogen. The microbes will have something to work with, but it will get washed out quite quickly, and the food source will dry up, if you like. So in the late 90s, engineered substrates such as 3DME were released, and these substrates had been engineered to be appropriately soluble. So what I mean by that is when you inject them into the ground, they stick, so they stick around, they have a long reaction life, but they are reacting. So you are getting a appropriate level of hydrogen being released to maintain this reductive dechlorination process. So it's not too insoluble that it sticks and it's not releasing hydrogen, and it's not too soluble that it releases too much hydrogen and washes away. This is really important when it comes to maintaining the rate of reductive dechlorination. What you don't want to do is take your TCE or PCE plume and turn it into a vinyl chloride plume. Vinyl chloride is much more toxic, it's much more mobile. You want that reductive dechlorination process to continue all the way through to ethene. You want it to fully dechlorinate. We're also avoiding multiple applications. So having something that is appropriately soluble means that you inject it once, you do one injection event, it creates redox conditions that are prime for reductive dechlorination. And so you can grow a large microbial consortia in situ. You can grow a large microbial mass in situ. This can only be done if you have a stable environment over a long period of time. If we were spiking the aquifer with hydrogen over multiple injection campaigns, redox conditions would be, all over the place, and you would stress the microbes and you wouldn't be able to grow this large consortia. Now, you can also alter the volume of these different injectable substrates. So if you're dealing with a low permeable formation like a clay, you can inject a more concentrated dose, or if we are looking to treat a much wider plume, then we can increase the dilution as well. In terms of 3-DME, what is it? So 3-DME is literally a molecule that we in Regenesis invented to maintain this reductive dechlorination process. It comprises a lactic acid tetramer stuck onto an ester bond with a fatty acid on the other end. And when you mix it with water, you form this emulsion, you form these polar molecules that when they are injected into the subsurface, they will bunch together to form these micelles, and they will travel through an aquifer, painting the subsurface with an electron donor. Once in the subsurface, it will continue to release hydrogen for up to 5 years. We have had some sites where it's been 7 years and beyond, but typically you expect it to have a life of 5 years, during which time the reductive dechlorination process will break down that contamination in situ. Now, what I must add is this doesn't necessarily mean that it will take 5 years to completely remediate your site. We would hope that it is much shorter than that, but the reaction life of this product is about 5 years. In terms of what's happening with this product in the subsurface, when you inject it into the aquifer, it will start to dissolve. So the 3-DME molecule will start to break down. As that molecule breaks down, it will release lactic acid, and this lactic acid will actually be broken down by a different group of microbes called fermenters, and this will break the lactic acid down and produce dissolved phase hydrogen that's going to be used as an electron donor in the reductive dechlorination process. So as this hydrogen is being produced, the dehalogenating bacteria, the reductive dechlorinators, so D. halicoides and D. halobacter, can then use the hydrogen as an electron donor, swapping out the chlorine atom for a hydrogen atom. It's that exchange of electrons that releases energy, giving the microbe the energy that it needs to live. And because it has a plentiful supply of hydrogen over a long period of time, you can fully dechlorinate things like PCE to DCE to TCE to vinyl chloride, and then eventually ethene, which is this harmless byproduct. So this is the typical, gone one too far. This is the typical signature you'd expect with reductive dechlorination, a reduction in TCE. You then get this production of DCE, vinyl chloride, and ethene. But it should be mentioned that, it doesn't mean that you have to wait for all the TCE to be degraded for then these microbes to jump onto DCE. The degradation of TCE, vinyl chloride, DCE, it's all happening at the same time. But typically, this is the breakdown signature that you'll get. So I'll hand over to Helena now, who'll finish off the rest of the presentation, and I'll catch up with everybody later during the questions and answer session.
Thank you so much.
Okay. No problem.
Jag ska fortsätta med att prata lite om kontrollprogrammet som vi gjorde. Och jag tänkte börja lite med de parametrar som vi mätte och tittade på. Det har ju en tendens att bli ganska många när man pratar om klorerade lösningsmedel. Det här kan man såklart anpassa från projekt till projekt, men det här var det som vi valde för detta projektet. När vi provtar grundvatten så börjar vi då förstås med att göra fältmätningar. Förutom att mäta in grundvattennivån så tittar vi även på temperatur, pH, syreförhållandena mäter man ju i syre och redox och konduktivitet och turbiditet som visar då hur mycket som finns i vattnet av olika partiklar. De som är mest intressanta här är pH, som är tanken då att det ska sjunka. Eftersom vi tillsätter mjölksyra bland annat, men även att syrehalterna och redox då ska gå ner, eftersom tanken med att tillsätta de här är för att stimulera den biologiska nedbrytningen, och de bakterierna som gör detta mår ju bäst om man har ett redox på ungefär minus 150 millivolt. Och konduktiviteten och turbiditeten kommer då sannolikt också öka som vi har tillsatt då de här fettsyrorna som då leder elektricitet då bland annat. Laboratorieanalyser gör man också en hel del. Såklart så tittar vi ju på föroreningarna, på de klorerade TC, DC och vinylklorid. Vi tittar även på de som inte är klorerade, slutprodukterna eten, etan och klorid. Eftersom de då indikerar att man har en fullständig nedbrytning. Klorid kan vara lite svårutvärderat eftersom det har en tendens att variera ganska mycket naturligt, men vi brukar ändå ta med den. Det vi också tittar på är konkurrerande elektronacceptorer. Om man ser grafen här eller figuren här till höger så är det så att om man går uppifrån och fortfarande har ett positivt redoxtal, det här är redoxskala, så har man då reduktion av nitrat och fyrvärt mangan på positivt redox. När man går ner under positivt så har man då först en reduktion av trevärt järn. Och därför vill man då se att halten av nitrat minskar och att halten av tvåvärt mangan och tvåvärt järn då ökar. För att se att det här är då också för att säkerställa att man kommer ner i rätt redox, eftersom redox i fält kan variera och kan vara lite svårt att mäta. Tittar även på de konkurrerande elektronreceptorerna sulfat och metan. Och här vill man då främst säga att det inte bildas för mycket eftersom det då kan konkurrera. Med det sagt så kan man fortfarande ha en nedbrytning av de klorerade lösningsmedlen även fast man har sulfat och metan. Men man bör hålla en liten öga och se till så att det inte stör för mycket. Tittar även på alkaliniteten för att se markens buffertkapacitet. DOC och det är ju sånt som också påverkas och bör öka om man tillsätter då 3DME eftersom det är organiskt. Och de organiska syrorna tittar vi på i början, de första 3 månaderna. Där möter vi ju specifikt bland annat laktat just för att se har vår injektionsvätska tagit sig ända vägen fram till brunnen där vi ska mäta. Och för en hel del av de här parametrarna så finns det ju inga riktvärden eller gränsvärden. Och nu tänker jag ju på de som inte är då rena föroreningsparametrar, alltså de klorerade, utan man tittar på till exempel för de konkurrerande elektronacceptorerna järn, mangan, nitrat, metan, sulfat och så vidare. Så tittar man ju i första hand på trenden, att man vill se att trenden går åt det håll man vill, kanske mer än halterna i sig. Så man får titta på många parametrar samtidigt och utvärdera allting ihop. Om vi då tittar lite på själva halterna. Det här är då en sammanställning, en summa vad vi hade. Och då har vi då tid på x-axeln och halt på y-axeln. Tycker ni att det är lite svårt att se så kan jag säga att blått då är TCE, rött är DCE, grönt är vinylklorid och eten är den lila biten högst upp. Och här har vi ju fått en väldigt fin nedgång över tid. Det är väl kvartal 4 där 2020 som sticker ut. Men där har vi ju också haft väldigt hög vinylkloridproduktion. Och det indikerar ju att man har en hög nedbrytning, så det är ju inte bara, det är ju positivt, ska jag säga, att man har det. Och räknar man lite på det så ser vi ju att vi har en reduktion av trikloreten och dikloreten på runt 95%. Vinylkloriden ungefär 68. Men det är ju som Jack berättar att vinylklorid bildas ju vid nedbrytning av TC och DC. Så det är naturligt om man inte reducerar den lika mycket lika fort. För då måste ju de TC och DC ta helt slut först. Tittar man lite mer år för år så ser man här också en fin nedåtgående trend, att vi har ju reducerat dikloreten och trikloreten till exempel med ungefär 90%. Samtidigt som vi har en fullständig nedbrytning. Om jag tar upp den här nedbrytningsskissen som Jack visade lite tidigare, så är det här ett mönster som man kan förvänta sig, även fast som han poängterade att allting bryts ner samtidigt. Då har man både TC till exempel och DC, så kommer ju DC börja brytas ner på en gång också. Sen är det nedbrytningssteget lite långsammare, men nedbrytning pågår ju ändå. PC hade vi inte här, men vi har använt det data vi har för att se om vi kunde få en liknande graf, och då ser den faktiskt ut så här. Vi har i princip hoppat rakt in i DC-pucken. Nu har vi lite andra, färgerna överstämmer inte riktigt, men där våran graf börjar, det är ju toppen på den gröna DC-pucken. Vi har alltså redan haft maximala halter när vi börjar och är på väg ner, och sen ser vi då 2020 kommer vinylklorid och eten med den toppen, och trikloreten ser vi bara den lilla sista nedgången där 2018-2019. Överensstämmer rätt så bra. En annan sak som vi mäter och brukar räkna lite på är det här med dekloreringsgrad. Och dekloreringsgrad är ju ett mått på hur stor andel av kloratomerna är det som har blivit avlägsnade. Och där börjar ju vi på dryga 35% för att sen då klättra oss uppåt till strax under 80 där sommaren 2020. Efter detta så ser man att grafen går neråt, och det handlar ju då inte om att saneringen går bakåt, utan det är en effekt man kan få när man får en väldigt nedbruten förorening. Och finns det då lite mindre kvar i någon mätning av de här oklorerade produkterna, så kan det då ge en liten visuell effekt av att dekloreringsgraden sjunker något. Men vi hade ju åtgärdsmålen i jord i det här projektet, så det ska jag också säga lite om. Före sanering hade vi ju medelhalter då ungefär 7,5 TC och DC. Efter saneringen, när vi hade gjort kontrollprogram i ungefär knappt 4 år, så gick vi tillbaka med Rotosonic och tog ut nya prover ihop med konsulten, och såg då att vi har fått ungefär 95% reduktion av TC och DC i jord. Och vi såg även att vi inte kunde hitta någon vinylklorid överhuvudtaget. Vi hade inte heller något analyserat jordprov över maxgränsen som var satt för ett enskilt prov. Och med det så hade vi då uppnått målet för saneringen. Jag ska säga lite grann också om brunn 4, där vi hade så väldigt höga halter jämfört med de andra brunnarna innan vi började. Där hade vi eten också, så vi hade en fullständig nedbrytning. Men vi ser då efter sanering har vi då reducerat TC med 99%. DC lite mindre 94% och vinylklorid ungefär som på det stora hela 67%. Sen har ju eten ökat väldigt, men det är ju för att nedbrytningen pågår. Och den är ju ofarlig, så det ser vi som ett gott tecken att det fortsätter även fast vi inte är där och provtar. Min sista bild nu ska jag ta och prata bara lite kort om siffror och tal. Tittar man på vad det kostar att göra saneringar så är vår erfarenhet att om man har en ganska typisk, om man kan säga så, sanering. Alla är olika, men om man ska ta och göra en uppskattning ungefär 700 till 1000 kronor tonnet om det inte är allt för förorenat och inte allt för mycket och man inte har stora kostnader för till exempel spont eller stora grundvattenflöden som behöver länshållas eller annat, så ligger man ungefär där. En termisk sanering, lite dyrare, kanske ungefär 3000 kronor tonnet. Och in situ räknar vi ofta ungefär 100 till 500, lite beroende på hur stort och komplicerat det är och hur mycket tekniker man går på med. Det man ska ha med sig också, och det som jag vill att ni ska ha med när man jämför med siffrorna, är att gör man den in situ som kanske kostar 100 till 500 kronor tonnet, hade ofta varit betydligt dyrare än de siffror som är angivna för till exempel schaktsanering, eftersom vi inte sällan jobbar under hus eller vägar eller på stora djup, som då driver upp schaktsaneringskostnaderna. För det här projektet hade vi en kostnad på 230 kronor tonnet, vilket är ungefär mitt i det spannet vi brukar säga för in situ. Tittar man lite på klimatet, som många lägger mer och mer fokus på nu för tiden, så har vi inte gjort någon klimatberäkning på det här projektet. Vi har gjort på andra projekt och det finns lite olika modeller att använda sig av. Men det vi ser är att med in situ har vi ungefär 10% av den klimatbelastningen som man har med en schaktsanering. Till sist så vill jag bara säga ett stort tack till Sanering kommun som har varit huvudman för saneringen, till Element som har varit konsult och med i projektet och till Regenesis som har levererat saneringsprodukterna. Och nu går vi över till frågor. So Jack, if you have any questions, it's time for the Q&A session.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Helena. Again, apologies because a lot have come in as you've been giving your presentation. So apologies if they have been answered, and I'll sort of ask them twice. One of the first ones that came in, presumably this is answered on this slide actually, is which consultant prepared the tender dossier for the project? Yeah.
So we had today they're called Element. That prepared the tenders, that had provided with the investigations, with the pre-investigations for the project, and then Sanering kommun then was the one that sent out the tender documents.
No problem at all. Another one on remediation goals. Someone asks if there was no remediation goals for groundwater and only for soil.
Yeah. So this for this remediation requires usually that way, that usually we work with remediation goals for groundwater only, and this time it was only soil. However, we did monitor groundwater throughout the project, as groundwater samples are much easier to use, and it's easier to sample. It's much more time consuming and also expensive if we were to go every 3 months and take out new soil samples to see the degradation in soil. So we use that as an indication to see when is it time to go and take the final soil samples to see if we have reached the remediation targets.
Great, no problem at all. So as I say, if questions come up as we're doing this Q&A session and anyone wants to write any more in, please feel free to, and I'll ask and answer them live. Another question that we've had, and I know when you and I were coming up with this webinar, we quite liked the fact that this was a sort of a smaller scale project, and it showed what could be done with in situ remediation of chlorinated solvents, and they don't always need to be these huge projects. And somebody's asked could you do this sort of remediation in phases, you know, over, I guess, over a series of years to spread the cost?
Well, I think it's possible to do that. We see that sometimes when we have clients that are limited on budget, we can adjust the remediation plan and do sections, or do the most, if, for example, if you have a source area, you can do the source. If you think it's very very concerning, the high levels, we can do that first. Or if you have a migrating plume, we can do a barrier first, and sort of adjust that to the budget, and and also if there are other kinds of limiting things, for example, if we can't access the entire site at once, or other things. But I guess you have had some experiences with that too, Jack.
Yeah, I think there's always this balance in my experience between time and money. You know, either there's not much time, but there's money to spend cleaning it up quickly, or actually we've got a lot of time but not much money to spend cleaning up the site. So what I would say is these sorts of remediation techniques absolutely can be phased. I think what you were saying about the barrier and source treatment was interesting. You know, if the immediate problem is on your site, you've got contamination moving off, you can put in a barrier to try and control that offsite migration, and then maybe buy yourself some more time to investigate on the site so that you have a better idea of what's going on in the source. Equally, if the plume and your site is pretty well characterized, but you've got to this point where, well, I can't afford to do this all at once, you know, I've only got X amount of money to spend this year on remediation. As you say, we can start in the source, do one injection, let that start to run, because one of the good things about enhanced bioremediation is once it's in, it's always working, and then slowly move our way across the plume as funds allow. So, you know, doing it in a phased approach is absolutely possible. Another question, sort of on a sort of a technologies basis, is on a, you know, if you were looking at other sites, you know, why was 3DME chosen for this particular site? And, you know, would you have considered any other technologies?
Well, if you look in general if you have a site with chlorinated solvents and permeable soils that are quite deep, contaminated quite deep, of course, reductive dechlorination is a way to go. I could see you could consider other options. For this project, they had considered, amongst others, thermal and excavation, and that is, of course, also possible remediation methods. For sites in general, what you could consider for, so to speak, competitive technologies to reductive dechlorination, I think you could use, for example, soil vapor extraction of contaminated groundwater. You could use chemical reduction, maybe. You could use, if you don't have, in some cases, maybe you can look at how much bacteria do we have, and other technologies.
I think this was something on Singular that was quite evident, is that we had the bacteria there at the time. So that's why we felt, I remember reviewing it and thinking, oh, should we do some bioaugmentation? But if you look at the contamination profile on this particular site, really what you were seeing was DCE store. You know, you had a lot of DCE in places, which would have suggested to me that really you're dealing with a carbon limited system, and actually all you need to do is inject some electron donor, and these microbes will have something to eat again, and they can start moving through the DCE. That sort of links to another question that's come in. They're sort of asking about if all of these compounds degrade at the same time. And you know, you and I know sort of there's the science way of describing this is a kinetic disparity. So like there's a difference in the speed at which each of these compounds break down. So TCE and PCE will go pretty quick. DCE is a bit slower. Vinyl chloride will go quite quickly. And then ethene, if you can sample it and measure it, great, but often that goes pretty quick as well. So so yeah, there is a bit of a difference. And here, you know, I think even though we looked at this site in 2016, I'm not sure there'd be anything I'd do different if you came to me again with this site saying, look, this is what we have, this is where we want to go with it. I would still go with a 3DME only option.
It's also very interesting. Sorry, but it's also very interesting because sometimes you can even see degradation of other contaminants. For example, if you have a chlorinated solvent contaminant together with a hydrocarbon contaminant, you can actually see the chlorinated degrading bacteria also degrade the hydrocarbon contaminant and using that as an energy source instead of the 3DME. So you can get the interesting co-effects from this.
For sure. So I'm just going to group some of these together. I'm going to group some of these together because there's a few people that have asked similar things. Somebody's asked is this method applicable for groundwater in bedrock, or do you have to adjust it? And if you do have to adjust it, how would you do that? Do you want to answer that one, and then I'll sort of pick up afterwards? Because we've done some bedrock ones.
Yeah, I mean bedrock is unlike soil in the fact that you have, well, either you have cracks where you have and then the contaminants go through the cracks, and then in that case I think that you could correct me, Jack, use this technology. If you have chlorinated solvents in crystalline bedrock, then it will be more difficult.
Absolutely, that's sort of the it's, as a quick summary, it's totally possible to do this sort of treatment in fractured bedrock. The challenge is more to do with delineating where that contamination is. It's particularly hard with crystalline bedrock, which you guys have a lot of in Sweden. If you're dealing with sort of chalk or limestone, it's a bit more forgiving because you've got that immobile porosity as well. We've actually done a whole webinar on this, which I can, if you sort of take a look on our website, and I talk about different different site investigation methods and that you can deploy to work towards an in situ strategy. The biggest thing is to do with appropriation of costs, I suppose, is the big difference when looking at this in bedrock. Most of your costs are going to be in the drilling to install the injection wells to then get this product into the ground. So it is unlikely that we would do it in a grid formation like we did at Svengula. We'd probably do it in a series of barriers to reduce the number of injection points that you need. But really it's going to be making sure that we intercept those fractures and then inject an electron donor or a chemical reductant into those fractures to reduce the contaminant mass. So yeah, it's, in summary, totally possible if the site investigation is good, for sure.
And I also know that we sometimes have added ISCO products for hydrocarbons in cracks as well, in quite shallow bedrock, but still an interesting case as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's just with good site investigation, bedrock's completely applicable. Let's have a look. What else have we got? Sorry, everybody. Microbes. Do you have to determine available microbes prior to injection? If there are none, can they be added? Do you mind? I'll take this one. Is that okay? Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So we can determine if microbes are going to be there. You can sample for them if you want. For reductive dechlorination, for sites impacted with chlorinated solvents, if you know that PCE was spilt, so say it's a dry cleaner, and actually what you're seeing in the ground is a lot of DCE, that would indicate to me that the microbes are already there. So if you can look for evidence of reductive dechlorination, that's a pretty good indication that you've got D. halgocoides bacteria there. If you are, and Helena and I have dealt with a couple of these, dealing with a PCE spill, and it was spilt decades ago, and all you have is PCE in the ground, that would indicate to me that there are no microbes there and you need to add them. You can add them, so we have a proprietary blend that you can add to the subsurface. Typically, you can do that through direct push injection as well. So these microbes are all injected in as part of the same application. So that's microbes.
I think that what you also should look at when you are thinking about the bacteria is the oxygen and redox conditions, because it might also be that you have bacteria that you need to push. You can do some additional application, but you also have a colony that is just dormant, and because they don't have the proper geochemical conditions for growth and degradation yet.
Absolutely.
Which you can create with 3DME, for example.
Absolutely. How are we doing for time? Oh, we're okay. So what else have we got here? Somebody asks, they noticed that there was a slight increase in TCE at the end of the remediation. Do you have any ideas as to why that is?
It could be a number of things. It could have been difference in the sampling, how the samples were taken. Without taking it on the top of my head, it could have been a different person sampling. It could have been different groundwater levels. It could have been small amounts of soil bound contamination being released. Could be a number of things. I remember us looking at it at the time and said, okay, we need to just have an eye on this for the next sampling round. But also what you see with reductive dechlorination, for this project, for the Svenljunga project, we had quite a nice trend, just declining, except for the second last sampling event. But usually you can see the levels go a little bit up and down, but still the trend is reducing. So if you just wait it out another sampling event or two, it usually degrades very well.
I think that's really important. That was a very slight increase, and you've got to look at the wider trend across the site and maybe not get too head up on the latest sample. If you've got 5 years of data showing that contaminant mass is continuing to reduce, then that's probably what you should focus on. Couple more to do with more practical things, really. Are there any conditions which might slow down the treatment or make it not possible? And then another question was, is what we're injecting safe? Is it harmful to the environment? Are there any safety questions when you're handling it on site? Sorry, I'm sort of gluing a lot of questions into one.
Do you want to start with the product question?
Yeah, I'll do the product question, and then you can do the conditions question. So the 3DME that was injected in this case, it is a food grade product, so it isn't harmful. So when you're mixing and handling it on site, very easy products to handle. So there's no big health and safety concerns that you might have if you were, say, handling hydrogen peroxide or something. In terms of, is it harmful to the environment? Again, it's not. We wouldn't be able to inject it into the ground if it was, I guess, is a way of thinking about it. It is a food grade product that is just eventually broken down as it ferments and releases hydrogen.
So what could possibly slow the degradation down? Well, one thing is what I think I mentioned briefly earlier during the presentation, that if you have high levels of methane or sulfate, that could compete as an electron acceptor and slow the degradation down. And that is why also we monitor for these parameters and watch them closely. I would say it's apart from the contaminants and the degradation products, it's some of the parameters that I keep my eye on the most, just to see, is it interfering with the degradation or not. And as I also said, they can be present, and they can in some cases be present in quite high concentrations without interfering with the degradation, but that is something that you need to look at together with your contaminant data. What we also see can maybe not slow it down, but delay it a bit, at least in the start of a project, is if, as in Sweden, we have very cold winter. Soil temperatures are usually lagging some, but eventually it gets cold even in the subsurface, and that can stall biodegradation. It can also, in some cases, even slow chemical reactions down, like if you're using ISCAR or ISCO. But what we see is that usually when it gets warmer, it sort of conserves it. So when it gets warmer, the chemical reactions pick up speed, and the bacteria sort of comes to life again. And we actually saw this. You can see it on the degree of dechlorination in this project, actually, where we went from 30 something to 50 something % within 3 months.
Yeah, not so much of a problem down here in the UK. Our groundwater temperature is pretty stable. Just to mention as well, with regards to the products, and particularly if there are consultants and regulators on the line, all of these are REACH registered as well. So they've all had to be confirmed that they're suitable for purpose within the EU as well. So that's something to bear in mind when you're looking at different technologies. So we've got maybe 7 minutes, so maybe 1 or 2 other questions. What were the maximum concentrations? I don't know if you have this to hand. Maximum concentrations in the soil after remediation, and were the soil samples sort of taken in the same place, sort of pre and post remediation?
No, it was the soil was taken as collective samples. I think it was 30, if I remember correctly. I presented mean concentrations at 0.7 approximately. The maximum concentration weren't much higher than that, and they were way below the target of 3 milligrams per kilo.
Okay, perfect. So is there any? Sorry, Helena, there's just a lot. I'm just trying to skim through to see if we have. So question on costs. You presented some costs. Did that include the costs of monitoring the groundwater as well?
Yes.
It did. Okay, cool. And then what else do we have? Can you do this? Sorry, I'm paraphrasing this question. Can you do these sorts of remediation on sites that are active? So I guess on sites where they're manufacturing something, I'm due to do a presentation on where we did this on a school. So like sites where this is, you know, they're manufacturing or receiving deliveries, is it very disruptive?
Well, we come with not a very large crew. As I said, usually we have a drilling rig, and we have usually 2 of my colleagues are out doing the injection works, and then we have some mixing equipment. However, mixing equipment doesn't need to be situated exactly where the drilling rig is injecting at the moment. You can pump it. We work quite often at places where we have, for example, vehicles, maybe lorries passing by. We can fence off a section and inject there, and then we can switch to the next. We can take the drilling rig inside and just make a hole in the floor and inject through there. Or we do directional drilling if you want to do injection under a building or a road or railroad or something, and we can just inject from the side, start drilling from the side and inject underneath. So there are quite a lot of possibilities, and we often work on sites where there are activities going on, and it can be everything from manufacturing industries, or it can be in road areas, or all kinds of places.
It links back to that question about being able to phase this if costs are an issue. So if you do have if you are working for, or you do have a small manufacturing site, you know, not only are you worried about the cost of this remediation, but then, oh, have I got to close my factory down for 2 weeks to let you do the remediation works? Often not. You know, as Helena said, the equipment used to do this is a similar sort of size equipment you use to put in monitoring wells, with a similar amount of disruption. So I would say if you've been able to do a site investigation on your active site, then you can absolutely do in situ injection work on that site as well.
Yeah, and we also sometimes work on construction sites where you need to be quick in and quick out, and because there's a lot of things going on, and so sometimes we go in and we install injection wells, and then we can, if needed, we can inject additional or the entire injection program from the side, basically, without disturbing the activities too much.
Perfect. Well, we're sort of approaching the end of our hour, Helena. Before everybody goes, you know, again, thank you, Helena, for making the time to do this, and you know, we really appreciate it, and I hope everybody on the call has found this useful. For you guys, the audience, in the next hour or so, you'll receive an email with your attendance certificate already attached. So if you no longer need to request this separately. Inside the email, there will also be a link to a short feedback survey. This is really important to us as Regenesis. You know, we like to hear if you found this topic interesting, and if you'd like to hear more about these sorts of sites. So please fill that in. You know, we really value your opinion. And this then helps us plan new webinar topics and new guest speakers. So again, thank you everybody for joining us and making the time to hear us talk. Again, thank you to Helena for writing the presentation and really doing all of the hard work. And yeah, I look forward to hearing from you all soon. If you are interested in these approaches, Helena and I are going to be at Renara Mark in the next couple of weeks. So look out for us, and be happy to chat through these options with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for listening.
Bye. No worries. Bye, everybody.